All right, so now we're recording. Hello, welcome to the NAGT webinar series. The NAGT webinar series is your one-stop shop for increasing our community's capacity in Earth education. Webinars in our series feature novel and innovative work in Earth education research and pedagogy, new teaching materials, and the classroom and professional experiences of people just like you. The NAGT webinar series is free and open to the public, and we encourage you to invite your colleagues to attend and join in the discussion. Before we start, please take a moment to review the Zoom controls on your screen. We ask that you leave your microphones muted and cameras off for bandwidth purposes. If you have questions or comments along the way, we encourage you to enter those in the chat, which our webinar leaders and staff will be monitoring. You can also use the reaction tab to give nonverbal feedback. And as a reminder, the NAGT webinar code of conduct applies to all venues, events, and forums associated with NAGT. And I'm going to go ahead and drop a link in the chat to that if anyone would like to review it. Dana, this is recorded. I have to set up the recording though. So it is now recording. Let's see.
Thank you, Ashley. And
yes, of course.
I can interrupt you.
So,
I think maybe the view isn't quite what you wanted it to be now that looking at it, like we can see your, okay, yeah, I hit play from start.
Here we go. Thank you so much.
That's it. Yeah.
All righty. And just a reminder, there is a link here on the screen for the schedule. It's on the NAGT webinar series homepage, and that's where you can see the upcoming events, the past events, so the archive of all of our previous events, and it's where the resources, any slides, and the recording of this webinar and all the other webinars will be available for viewing. And that is everything that's a part of my introduction. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the webinar leaders for today.
Thanks so much, Ashley. I'm glad we have a small group here, which means we can hopefully have everybody introduce yourself. So if you're comfortable, we'll do the popcorn method in a minute, where you can introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what you hope to get out of this time we have together. So my name is Amy Weisslogel. I just wrapped up my stint as sort of chair of the NAGT DEI committee. And in that committee, we had a discussion that was inspired by seeing the AGU Biogeosciences, I believe, division that organized what they called an office hours to help with people navigate the awards nomination process. And we thought that was a great idea. So we're hoping to emulate that here today and spend a little bit of time. We can get to know each other, talk a little bit about the awards that exist and their value and finding people to recognize. Because as we all know, sometimes the people who are most deserving of the recognition are often busy recognizing others. And so we kind of want to make sure that we find those people who are doing great things and get them due recognition. So yeah, so my introduction, I think, is done for that. And we'll kind of come back after everybody introduces themselves and talk a little bit more about awards and nomination. If you have, since we are a smaller group, if you have something that you're particularly hoping that we address, you can just go ahead and let us know that when you introduce yourself, and we'll put that on the list of things to talk about. So I will actually popcorn it over to Sammy, who's also on the DEI committee.
Hello, everyone. I am Samuel Nyako. I'm on the NAGT DEI committee. I'm actually the incoming chair, or Amy, am I already the chair? Yeah, well, I'm the chair for the DEI committee, and yeah, I'm happy to be here to talk about, how we can get more people to be involved in our awards decisions, and then awardees. So thanks for being here. I really appreciate your time. And I'll popcorn it to Dana.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dana Thomas. I'm here in a couple of capacities, both as to learn as an NAGT member. I'm an educator at the Jackson School of Geosciences at UT Austin. Transparency, I don't think I've ever nominated anyone, and I'd like that to change in the future. So here to hear tips. And I'm also on the executive committee of NAGT as a counselor at large, and I'm the liaison for the DEI committee. So I will be trying to help take any recommendations we get today and bring them back to NAGT leadership. And I'll popcorn over to Kelsey.
Thanks, Dana. So I'm Kelsey Russo-Nixon. I work for EarthScope Consortium, which is actually a new facility between UNAVCO and IRIS that are now merged as of January 1. We are EarthScope. I have been a longtime NAGT member and always learn from these webinars, but this one in particular stood out because I have someone in mind that I would like to nominate. I manage an internship program for community college students. And so there's at least one faculty member that I think deserves recognition that I've been working with. And so I was just wanted to learn more about the process. And let's see, I'll popcorn over to Amy.
I think I went already, so I'll popcorn it to Beth.
Hi, my name is Beth Pratt-Sitola. I'm actually with with formerly UNAVCO, now EarthScope, same as Kelsey, who just went. I think I have actually nominated a teacher, like a K-12 teacher, like years and years ago. I'm actually on the DEI committee here, and one of our long-term goals was to get better at equitable nomination processes, not just for awards, which we don't really give so much as committees and things. So I just thought I would listen in and see if I could glean any best practices. And I will nominate Megan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Megan Cook, she, her pronouns. I am currently the Southeast section of NAGT's OEST award coordinator. Well, typically that's what I've done so far, but I would love to coordinate more of the awards there. And this is my first year serving in that role. And I have yet to nominate anyone for NAGT awards as well. So I kind of took on the role of being the awards coordinator to learn more about the behind the scenes and what that looks like. But to also help facilitate a more equitable practice and to try to engage more folks into being a part of this process. So unfortunately, there were not as many nominations as we would have liked to have had. There were some states that didn't nominate any deserving earth science educators. And so I'm very happy to be a part of this conversation to see how we can get more deserving people these types of recognition. I will pop it over to Catherine.
Hello, I'm Catherine Riker. I am at the University of South Carolina, and I am currently the chair of the Outstanding TA Award committee, which is really fun. I've nominated grad students and undergrad students for that award. Way back in the day, I got that award, so it's really good to see what's kind of on the other side of that process. And like Megan, that committee's been said about the OEST awards, been working on ways to help broaden the nomination pool there. And I will popcorn it to Dawn, who brought snacks.
I am snackless, I'm afraid. I'm Don Haas, the Director of Teacher Programming at the Paleontological Research Institution in Ithaca, and I'll note that we'll be hosting the Eastern Section NAGT meeting in May. I'm also a past president, and as such, am a member of the nominating committee, and I have been serving on the advocacy committee for many years now. I was president of NAGT, I think in 2017, 2018, something like that, a long time ago. And who's left? I think most everybody has spoken.
Caitlin might be the.
Caitlin, I will popcorn over to Caitlin.
Good afternoon. If it's afternoon for you, I am Caitlin Callahan. I am at Grand Valley State University in Grand Rapids, Michigan. A couple different reasons I was interested in this conversation. I am involved in, as far as NAGT, part of the committee, mighty committee of two, so maybe not a committee, involved in the selection of students who receive funding to attend the rendezvous. And that is a sort of a challenging question of how to determine that. And so just had in my mind wanting to seek out different ideas about just nominations and selection process and things like that. And then also here in GVSU is predominantly undergraduate institution, and we do have awards that we give to students. And I have quietly been thinking for years, sometimes voicing, we don't have much of a process for how we give awards that I would like to see improved, and have it be more equitable in what kind of ways are nominations considered or awards considered, and just trying to think a little bit outside the box. So I realize my two examples don't quite fit exactly with the context, but I thought I would, as I said, try to think outside the box. And I saw this, I thought, hey, sure, sounds good. And it fit my schedule, which was amazing.
Thanks, Caitlin. No, that's great. I think a lot of, as I was kind of jotting down what people were interested in, I think maybe many of us have had the experience of now being on the other side or seeing like how the process of award selection really impacts, who gets recognized, and we can do better, I think, is kind of the general. There are things that might be improved upon overall. So yeah, so I think with this crowd, we've got probably all a clear buy-in as to why these awards are important and how they are a great way for our community to come together and recognize people who are doing great things. The website, which I'm sure you all are familiar with, I'll just pop it in the chat. So if you want to take a peek, and if you see anything in particular, oops, I did the wrong one. That's the second website I was going to share with you, is the website that is for, I guess I messed that up, but if you go to the link I did put in the chat, that is the Excellence in JEDI Award that the DEI committee oversees the selection process. And so that is one specific award. If you want the full list of awards, I'll put that in the chat as well. And obviously there's a lot of different kinds of activities that people and kind of roles that people are serving in that we try to recognize. So if anybody has one in particular out of this list to discuss, we can put that open in a minute to bring that up. But I do want to just take a moment to make you all aware of and use this time to kind of advertise the JEDI Award, which we've had two awardees, Rochelle and Rashawn, and they are amazing. And so it's been super gratifying to see those materials come in and be able to recognize their contributions. Also, at the same time, we kind of realized we were starting this new award and we're sort of making up how to evaluate them and things that we hadn't really considered in terms of like how long is a nomination active for, and then if you're comparing a 3-year-old nomination to a new nomination, like maybe that person has done some more things in those few years. So to make it equitable, we realized we needed a process to like reach out to update the previous submitted nominations. So kind of just once you started going through this process, we realized there's a lot of different elements that contribute to who we get to see in the nomination pool, what we see about them in the nomination pool. Like how to ask somebody for their CV is a little can be uncomfortable if you know, maybe then they get the sense that you're going to nominate them from something. And if they never hear about it, you know, there could be a little awkwardness there. So anyway, we just sort of realized like maybe it would be a nice thing to have a conversation about these awards, who we want, you know, how we can get more people who are deserving to appear in the nomination pool effectively. So I think with that, I would say, are there any particular awards that people want to discuss, or does any of the other kind of facilitators here have something they want to chime in with about what we can do at this time? Any suggestions? So maybe if we kind of, I heard like sort of 3 kind of topics. I know Kelsey, you said you had somebody in mind to nominate. Beth, you said that you had some interest in talking about best practices. And then Caitlin actually mentioned something that was really, I think, at the heart of an issue we've been grappling with, which is how do we gain the ability to support a more diverse participants to attend the rendezvous, and that allocation of funding and like travel stipends is something we've been trying to think about ways to alter or maybe expand and to include people who might not be the regular rendezvous people that you would see, but to maybe get some of the people who, wherever the location is, that we could reach out to the community there and get people who might otherwise not attend. So I think the order I would like to start in maybe is to just, we've got about in the next boarding, we'll maybe do about 10 minutes per topic or so. We could kind of budget that. We could have a quick conversation, I think, on best practices, which would be really helpful to hear from everyone about their perspective on that. And then also if they see things in particular on, you know, NAGT award websites or things like that that are confusing or can be improved, I'll take some notes and we'll definitely follow up with that. So yeah, anybody who wants to share some best practices that they're aware of, that'd be fantastic.
And I might clarify that best practice, like I think I said it quickly, but to say it again, like not necessarily awards, you know, but like committees, like any of this, we've been meaning to put together a sort of guidance for our governance on this sort of thing, and just haven't gotten around to it yet, you know, like there's anything else to do. So like if you can point me to something online where we can do that, you know, they're game. It's just a matter of people knowing.
Yeah, is there anything that you've come across in your work that you recognize as being particularly valuable to be aware of or include? Beth, or yeah, Catherine, great.
Sure. So I think this is kind of perhaps it's low-hanging fruit, but and it is award related, but the group that's been working on the outstanding TA awards for the last 2 years, or this is our, I guess, second full year cycle. We took some time to kind of look back through who had been nominated, who we wanted to be nominated, what criteria, like trying to make really explicit what our criteria were. And so prior to the list, if you click on that link, you'll see how nominees are evaluated. That wasn't previously provided. That was something that the committee discussed, reflected on, ultimately agreed upon, and agreed to kind of come back and revisit as needed in future years once we could kind of see how that worked. But what we found was that it led to much stronger letters, which also is really meaningful for the award recipients, in this case, undergraduate and graduate students who are often hearing for the first time how much they're being recognized for the first time on a national stage for how much their teaching work is valued. So I think that's been really good. And again, like I said, probably low-hanging fruit, but making explicit the criteria we're using for the different awards. And then just kind of keeping an eye on where our nominations are coming from. So like this year, we had a bunch of nominations from new institutions and new nominators, which tells us that we're starting to reach more people through, whether it's going through different listservs or personal contacts, like just helping get the word out. And then the other thing I would kind of add to that I think has been really exciting for us as far as getting to the rendezvous and who's able to attend that. Dana last year awesomely organized a networking call for all the awardees, since this happens to be an award with up to 30 recognitions a year. So we met, we got them to talk to one another, we talked about NAGT benefits, and then we invited them to contribute a poster to the rendezvous talking about their teaching wisdom. And we're going to repeat that same thing this February. And because now we have a larger group of 25 nominees from the last 2 cycles, inviting them to share at other conferences too, to try to continue to just like broaden out who's aware of the award. So just some small things that we've been working on that are relatively easy, but seem to be having a bit of an impact on who's getting nominated and who's doing the nominating.
That's great, Caitlin.
So I agree with you. Very important to be explicit about the criteria. But I actually think sometimes in some instances, it's hard to determine what is that criteria. Like, how do you decide? So when you said that low-hanging fruit, I was like, well, it's an obvious priority. How did you decide upon criteria, and how, yeah, like, that seems less low-hanging than maybe I don't know, maybe I'm missing something, but that's my question. Holistically,
Yeah.
okay, yeah.
We talked about that particularly because we're evaluating undergraduate and graduates who may have very different teaching experiences, and different things are going to be differently expected of those groups. And so, we had that holistically evaluated, and then though excellence in all criteria is neither expected nor required. So it's kind of like, if you did all these things, man, you'd be a shoo-in, but you do not have to do all these things. You could do one of them or 2 of them really, really well. But I agree. I also think for something like the funding for the rendezvous, and I can put myself forward as a problem case, is I tend to bring 5 or more students to the rendezvous, all of whom I say, hey, you should apply for money. And like, you should not give my lab all that money. Like, you shouldn't, because that's too concentrated. But,
Yeah.
I don't know how you put that into criteria to just say, again, evaluate it holistically to ensure the broadest number of deserving individuals, receive support.
I think the potentially for those criteria question, and then also, and there's sort of apples and oranges, I realize, but sort of making the case of need or making the case of accomplishment, if those are the kinds of things that are parallel. How do you evaluate, like, so you just said, how do you evaluate holistically an undergraduate against a graduate student? That seems pretty tough. I mean, hopefully they're 2 different awards. Because that would seem like a challenge to figure out. How would you recognize an undergrad next to a grad student? Are there 2 different awards, or is it one? I just, oh wow, okay.
And we've kind of had this conversation too, and thinking about how to reach underrepresented groups and get them a rendezvous experience, and lowering the financial hurdle and all that. And it opened up some interesting conversations, none of which had really easy or clear-cut, like, action items that came out of that. But it kind of, I think, demonstrated how there's a lot of power and potential in how these awards are allocated, and that we maybe haven't thought about it from like, oh, it'll go out there and it'll do some good, but there is this inequity that can result just because some people have more familiarity, like Catherine students, they know the rendezvous, they know how awesome it is. So of course they're going to apply. It's not that we don't want that to continue, but it's just that then, encouraging the ones, the people who might not have that, liaison to encourage them is a challenge.
But certainly, Catherine, agree. It makes sense. make a criteria explicit, but I will still say holistic evaluation still feels. If I were reading it as a candidate or as a nominator, I guess I still kind of wonder, well, what does that mean? In terms of experience, or yeah, I don't know. What would you say?
Yeah, I'm wondering if there's a way, I know Amy, you talked about like kind of formulating some bigger recommendations, like if we need some sort of guidance for the different awards committee to say, you should, as a committee, you have been asked to come up with this evaluation criteria, or to specify what the evaluation criteria is and how it'll be looked at, or voted on or whatever. But maybe it's worth saying that those criteria should be in line with the following goals of NAGT. Because I wonder if, and think about funding, like funding for the rendezvous specifically, like I, as an NAGT member, would rather money go to another member of the community that's going to have a harder time getting to the rendezvous than, again, it's great for my students. I'm not trying to undermine them by any stretch, but like we'll figure out funding if we need to. And so maybe part of the criteria for something like that is saying, access to other resources that would support participation, long-term participation in NAGT, short or long-term, I don't know.
I think
Thought I wasn't in the business of giving out awards because I was thinking like the Jedi Award, but I'm like, oh, we give out travel awards. In fact, I'm going to start evaluating them later today. I didn't make that connection. For attending the Gauge Sage workshop, we have money for student stipends. And certainly one of the criteria we've used, sort of getting at what Catherine was saying, is like, we start by just like going through the institutions, and making sure that we can give one to each of them, and then getting into more detailed, well, not exactly like this, right? But unless somebody, and then getting into looking at them more closely if there's multiple ones from a same institution or something like that, right? Somebody has to turn in something at least decent, but if they're the only one from their institution, they're a lot more likely to get it, just because of trying to keep things spread around. So I guess it's I have to go look at the criteria again, but it's explicitly part of the criteria is that, it's a plus, to be from an institution that we're not supporting with other people too, so that's kind of part of the process.
Yes, I have a question. It might be more rhetorical, but other award committee chairs maybe could, or just, award committee chairs. So I think that's Megan and Dawn here, maybe. The most, I guess, structured evaluation would be like a rubric. Do y'all use rubrics for yours? I know at least Kelsey and I are both involved in, like, I think, student selection for programs, and like, yes, we have a rubric, and sometimes it's like painstaking, right? What goes into that, and maybe like a discussion on whether that's something that should be required, or it sometimes means that it's asking more of committee members who are reviewing the applications. So is there an in-between? Is there like a happy medium, like maybe
Sure,
a number? Yeah, thanks, Megan.
I can speak to that. So when I came on this, my position is relatively new. The outstanding or science teacher award was kind of done in a different way. I in my conversations with Christy of trying to get this to be a more standardized and more equitable process for this. So She developed a rubric that I used, and basically we didn't have many states that submitted, and this is just in the Southeast section, that even submitted or nominated anybody. And then the states that did, there were typically only one or two. And so on the advice of Christy, it was to involve the state representatives for their states to pick who their winner is for their state. But then when we did the section winner, I asked for volunteers so those state representatives who maybe didn't have any nominations, I asked them to volunteer, so voluntold, to, would you please help me with trying to pick the section winner? And that's when I essentially gave them a rubric, and I can share that with you all if you're interested. I've just got to go find it. And I had multiple people, I think it was 3 of them, that looked at the different state winners and then just rated them according to this rubric. And then I just added up whichever one had the most points at the end as being our section winner. But yeah, I mean, there wasn't a lot of people to begin with to really have those needed. And I think that's probably why it hasn't been there. This really strict, straightforward criteria and structure of how we do this, because there just hasn't been a lot of nominations. So I think that that's something we definitely need to start thinking about if we are going to start trying to do this outreach and increasing our volume of our nominations coming in. But typically, from my understanding, it's been a very state representative driven for the OEST award. State representatives will do their own nominations. We didn't have, I think we had maybe one self-nomination. The rest of them were a state representative or somebody who was very aware of the OEST award. So something that I'm trying to do more explicitly this time is making sure that the state representatives are doing, if they can, and their availability, show the awards or show the impact of their awards on their state winners. So I have some that are going to like the schools and presenting the award to them. So hopefully that's getting the word out more about this. We're trying to get it more into just communications with the communities and things like that. We're trying to brainstorm. But yeah, so there is a rubric. It's not, not the best. It could probably use some tweaks to it, but yeah, there was some kind of structure that we tried to use with my now involvement of what this looked like. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you so much, Megan. I think it resonates with me when you say that maybe the rubric wasn't like necessary yet, because there weren't more nominations than there were awards expected to give. And like, I think that's maybe the situation with a number of awards across not just NAGT, but probably a lot of other societies. And like, we don't want it to be like that, right? So it's just a matter of, we should probably have a rubric at some point, whether it's building it now in anticipation of wanting that really transparent fairness, or whether it's like, well, let's wait. Catherine.
I was just gonna say, and Dana knows this, like the OTA awards, to the best of our knowledge, since they were established, it was only the last cycle that we first hit turning down someone for the award. And so, I can totally see that when you have such a dearth of nominees, it's kind of hard to start thinking about like, what are our criteria? Like, I got to start somewhere. I also wonder if part of the issue in that case, like, and I know NAGT has talked about this from a lot of different angles, is just like how to reach those K-12 teachers. And I say this as a former K-12 teacher to be clear. I wonder if it's worth asking the K-12 teachers themselves, like the awardees, not like who else they would nominate, but if we were to find another great earth science teacher in your district, who would know about them? Like, do you have a science coordinator, a professional development coordinator, someone like that? Because they likely know the person who's like, oh yeah, this person emails us every month with a list of, opportunities or whatnot.
That's actually something that I'm trying to do as well. Partnering with the state geological surveys is really important because they interact a lot with the K through 12 education system. So that's something trying to intentionally engage with so that they can get the word out and be able to maybe nominate some of the folks that they're working with.
That actually, was kind of led me to a question in terms of like, do you think that the primary barrier to receiving nominations is just awareness of the awards in this case, Megan?
Sorry, yes, I was typing in.
Oh, no, yeah.
I sent the OAST nominee rubric in the chat. So that's something that Christy Visagie shared with me. So again, it's very, basic, but it was something that I used because I came to the same question of, well, how do we pick? I don't feel right just going, that person seems better than that person. So anyways, that's in there for you. My understanding, and from what I have been told, that it's just awareness and that aspect for the OASD, and that I guess the emphasis of NAGT may be more towards the higher education educators instead of not necessarily the K through 12, and that there could be more outreach on that area. That's just kind of my sense of what I've gathered since I've been the awards coordinator. But and it is, I mean, you have to really know the person to nominate them and the questions that they ask. Maybe if you're just a coworker and you see them doing amazing things in their classroom, but you're not necessarily able to fill out everything that they're asking, you might feel kind of disinclined to really engage in that nomination form. So I don't know if maybe there might be another way that we might think about how we might nominate, or that there's another way to get that information instead of relying on the nominator to know all that stuff, because that might be a deterrent for some.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate that response because I feel like you get the nominations people who are connected to the network somehow, and then that's, especially if you have only a few people, then you're really kind of rewarding people for being connected, which is not the worst thing. I mean, they still have criteria that they're doing great stuff, but it's just kind of this limiting factor to how we are able to recognize people. And Beth, you've had your hand up for a while, I think. So.
Yeah, thank you for the suggestions so far on best practices. And I think we're starting to get towards another part of the best practices that we've hoped to do better on, which is broadening who gets, and again, I'm kind of thinking about committees and boards of directors and stuff like that as well. But how do we make sure that more people know about it? Because otherwise it's been very much from one person to the next just within our existing community, and we'd like to do better.
That is an excellent, that is exactly what we were struggling with. And then we kind of wanted to go back and sort of do a little bit of a kind of what Catherine mentioned that they were doing with the TA awards, is looking back and see who's getting the awards. And turns out we have name and institution, but we don't know anything about their identities actually. And we thought that was kind of something we would like to start being more aware of, because I think that kind of observation, gives you a sense of how well you're doing reaching out to diverse communities. So if anybody has any, we have not figured out how to do that exactly, but if anybody has suggestions, we're all ears. Caitlin.
I have a follow-up question. I'm impressed by that idea of, you may know someone who you admire and see doing a lot of good things, but you're not sure about how to write it up, or you don't know all of the things, or you don't have all of the information. And also with this issue of awareness, I'm kind of curious about the definition of awareness, because NAGT can advertise the heck out of the idea that you could do the nomination process, but there must be a gap, right? Between, okay, you can see the email come in and see that there's an opportunity to nominate someone, but then what? And is the awareness part not necessarily the dissemination that there's the option, but is it what's involved? And can you have a team of people involved in a nomination if need be? Can you have something like that? Like, if you don't know everyone, can you collaborate with other people to do the nomination? Like, what are the pathways to nominations for people who might not know, okay, I see this, but now what? Yeah.
Yeah, I love that, Caitlin. I think the nominating process itself sets up a barrier of labor that not everybody has the ability to deal with. So there are that we were kind of hoping, and this is, I've been taking notes here, so we'll kind of in the DEI committee for sure ruminate on this and maybe have some ideas. You know, the self-nomination was the one we thought, well, maybe we could really encourage that, but maybe we need to like reach out and encourage people to self-nominate in a way, or you know what I mean, or maybe there's things that we could do to make that more like a less of a that gap that you mentioned to shrink it a little bit.
Well, even just riffing on that idea of self-nomination. Here's how to self-nominate and not feel embarrassed that you're self-nominating. Let's have a paragraph that shows me how to do that. And maybe that would be a way to change awareness to know, oh, I can self-nominate, but I don't feel comfortable doing that. How do you, here are strategies, here are ways to think about that. So then that changes, that adds to the awareness. I'm just kind of riffing, but.
I'm amused by the cat. And normally my cats appear, but haven't yet. I'm sitting here taking this all in, and for one thing, recognizing that in terms of high school awards, New York is a different place than pretty much everywhere else in the country, because we've got about a quarter of the high school or science teachers in the country are New York earth science teachers. And I think the best ones I know have already won the award. But you know, there are lots of layers to figuring out who to nominate. I think getting to the state science teachers conference, if you can do that, and getting to know people in that setting is great. And I've gone to the Science Teachers Association in New York State for probably more than 20 times over my professional career, and am there pretty much every year, and that's really a great way to connect with teachers. And you know, for example, the earth science brunch or luncheon or whatever has about 100 high school earth science teachers at it every year, which is maybe one of the biggest gatherings of high school earth science teachers in the country. But the meeting in terms of DEI issues is the percentage of white folks at the state meeting is pretty different than the actual makeup of the teaching force statewide, largely because New York City is way underrepresented at the Stannis meeting. So that's a complication that I don't have great strategies for, but would love to hear what folks think about that.
You've hit upon a tough problem.
Yep. Yeah, and I will note, I just thought of this now, and I'm dumb. We have a NOAA grant with Prince George's County, Maryland schools, which is one of the 20 largest school districts in the country, adjacent to DC, 130,000 students, and they have a biogeochemical systems course that is a required course for every student, every high school student in the district. And we're working on both with the district on both that course and their newly revised environmental science course, and getting to know, we just got funded in September on that, But I'm getting to know some teachers there, and I know the director of science very well. So I will seek out nominations from the director of science for that. And I have one or two teachers in mind, and it's also a majority minority district, and has a very diverse teaching force, although very stretched thin, which is true, of course, all over the country. But they are way understaffed and having a really hard time hiring folks. If you know teacher candidates that are good, I know lots of places that are hiring, including Prince George's County.
Yeah, we kind of live in this like era of time poverty and
Yeah, I learned at the
poverty.
the State Science Teachers Conference in New York in September that half of the science teachers, half of the high school science teachers in the Syracuse district are subs right now. Yeah.
It's wild.
Yeah.
Well, I'm keeping an eye on the time a little bit. I don't want to shortchange Kelsey. I know you've been kind of came with some expectation, maybe getting a little bit of guidance about nomination. Hopefully this has been helpful up to this point, but if there's something like a particular award that you have in mind, or a question about going about this, we're happy to.
Great. Yeah, thank you. I do. So I'm glad you posted the link earlier to the nomination form. So I've been looking through those, and so the one that applies most to me, I think, would be the GO2IC divisions for outstanding faculty, but it says adjunct and specifically calls out part-time. So is that a pretty strict requirement? Person, at least the one person I had in mind is full-time.
So I think, and Catherine or Sammy might, or Danielle actually, is this the one that Brian Hollister oversees? Is this his kind of?
I can post the link in the chat if that's easier to the.
Yeah, because I'm kind of looking. I'm looking at it. I see what you say.
Yeah.
And this is where I think maybe some of our website information can be improved a little bit, because if there is a person that you could just say, hey, ask this question pretty quickly, that would be helpful. And I want to say it's Brian Hall.
It looks like the current chair is Michael Selvins.
Or Michelle Selvins.
I'm sorry. Thank you. That's my reading ability.
And where did you find that information?
On the overall award page, there's a composition of the committee.
Okay.
I agree that could be more consistently placed to be easier to find. And also, that doesn't have email addresses. So now I need to Google Michelle Selvin. I think I have her email, but
yeah. Whereas there are other NAGT pages. Like, I think when you are elected to be an officer, your email gets hyperlinked everywhere. And so maybe we could request, yet another thing from our either NAGT executive office staff or CERC staff. Like, when these committees change, can we have a hyperlinked to their email address?
So I know that's always a potentially sensitive issue, because then people can get signed up for spam or whatever.
Oh, right. Yeah.
But I do wonder if that goes back to the having an awards at NAGT.org. That obviously someone has to be responsible for then forwarding it to the right person, but that also keeps it consistent rather than trying to figure out who the committee chair is each year.
I think that would be a pretty
idea.
low bar, or that seems like low hanging fruit too, to kind of just make this alias to capture these questions.
I did want to point out, award winners don't have to be NAGT members. So it's something to keep in mind. That doesn't limit their ability to get the award. So don't be deterred by thinking that they have to be NAGT members.
And we've kind of had that discussion, like, is that if they don't have to be, but do we give that weight in our evaluations? Like, if they are, and I don't think we really fell hard on either side of that kind of question, but it was something that we're like, oh, is this to reward people in our community or just people in our discipline or kind of in our field, which outside of the organization. So that was something that's good to clarify.
So in the meantime, I can find this Michelle, maybe reach out to Michelle and ask about this specific award. Okay.
Great. Well, we're kind of down to the last 5 minutes, so we can kind of see what people want to do with that. Yeah, you go ahead, Dana.
Sammy, did you want to say something?
Oh,
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question. So I'm with the GED division, the Science Education Research Division, and for their awards, I think they have some really interesting stuff going on there that I think I just want to know if other divisions have thought about this. But they for all the awards, they have one for early career and late career, and I think even middle career, because the reasoning is that, you know, you have this early career people coming in who have not done, you know, a lot of work, but at least deserve some form of recognition. And we have these middle and late career people who have done a lot and also deserve some recognition. Is this something that we think other divisions should consider, especially with the JEDI award? We've got people who have done so many great work right in the past and they're not doing it anymore. Is it something we should consider going forward?
So I'll we're having a little bit of an exchange in the chat about this. I wonder if this is something else that the like tips for nominating and tips for self-nominating could help with. Because I will say, as a very proud recipient of that early career award, I know that it was a heavy lift from the nominator and the people who helped write letters. Like it's not something that I take for granted, for sure. I think maybe like, I know, can't let I put this in the chat, but like I'm imagining like a mock interview where I sit down, or one of us sits down with another one of us and kind of faux interviews another, for like, well, Sammy, I'd like to nominate you for this award. Let's go through the criteria together. I see this, that, and the other. Can you give me some tips about what should be included in your letter from your perspective? Like, what kind of questions should you ask as the nominator? Or then, you know, if you're self-nominating, I don't know if it's worth like a point of view, like I'm considering nominating myself, but definitely like tips for how you identify letter writers, what kinds of information to include, maybe strategies for revising nomination packages, because things don't always go through the first time. You know, I'm wondering if that might help with some of these, because I know, again, it is a big ask for nominators to put together all those things for the different stages, and early career is particularly often particularly still trying to figure out all the service components and balancing everything.
Yeah, I like that idea a lot, and I wonder if it might help address that component of awareness. Is that if it can feel a little bit more accessible as far as understanding what's involved, that might change things.
There's kind of like a culture shift that maybe for some people might be minor, but some people might be a little bigger, to like, you know, be able to brag a little bit and not just pivot towards the humble nature that some is more dominant in certain cultures than others.
Yeah. And also to assure that, I mean, I think even not necessarily the question of the shyness, but also, well, is it going to look good to the evaluating committee if I self-nominated rather than someone else? Like, is there an explanation from the selection process to make clear that nominations are considered whether you nominated yourself or somebody else did?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how is that treated? How is it seen? Because I think then you're right. Then there's that other layer of how do you boast or or present and share. And that, yeah, I think that's sort of a second layer to it, or third, whatever. Multiple.
Yeah, Dana just put in the chat like a real-time nominating, like they had those like Wikipedia thons or whatever, where you try to like write something about some other people. Would be great, like a nomination, you know.
I like that. Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about that. That's when you see some of the award winners announced, and so it's fresh on people's minds. All, you know, the people that we're going to see at meetings, we might not consider like broadening the aperture, but every nomination I think is good to have. We've talked about how if someone even, well, they might stay in the queue and could get, someone isn't awarded one year, but yeah, for me, it's kind of like, if I don't write something down or set like a calendar event for myself to do it, it's like it flies out. And so when we're thinking about it, it could be nice.
And even we don't really have like a tradition of like emailing the people who were nominated but weren't selected and just being like, you're still really great and awesome. And we kind of, their nominations kind of languish, and the people who did all the work, you know, into that, I guess there's just nothing that really comes out of that. So there's all these like nuanced things that I just from the outside had never considered, that ends up seeming like it could really improve the whole process and how people feel participating in the nomination process, and what we then are able to recognize as a result. I do want to, we are kind of at the time limit right now, so I don't know if people have to step off, but if you want to stick around, I think we can. I think, I don't know, Ashley, unless Ashley's going to shut it all down. But
I personally can stay for a bit longer, but I have a hard cutoff at 1:30.
okay. And I'll need to step off a couple minutes, but I'm happy to hear Sammy's comment, and if people want to stay there.
Yeah, I really like Kelly's idea about self-nominations and how to really do it, because not all of us have communities, right? People do great stuff, TAs, you know, teachers, K-12 teachers, they do great stuff, and it's only known to, you know, their small community, their small school that they are in. So having that form of, you know, self-nomination where people can nominate themselves and through their smaller communities can have letters written for them, I think it's will really be useful, and even you know, create those kind of awareness that she's kind of talking about. Although I don't see why people should be shy nominating themselves, but you know, it's a little bit you know, difficult throwing yourself out there that, you know, I'm the best, give me this hour. But I think it's also really important, right? Knowing that not all of us have these big communities that, you know, I can easily go to Catherine that write me a letter, or I can easily go to Amy to write me a letter. So I think this is a conversation that we really need to have, and, you know, encourage people to do that.
Actually, Sammy, I want to follow up on that. You just reminded me of a conversation I had that I thought was really remarkable. As a conversation with a student, where he was saying it just doesn't feel like he was asking me about that difference between being recognized by someone saying, I think you should apply for this, I think you should do this, and then he said, am I really supposed to like say I'm interested? But like that risk for, I mean, I'm talking to an undergrad, but that especially for nominating, self-nominating for a TA award or an undergrad or a grad award, or potentially, and when do you learn that? Like, I think again, it's like that assumption of that knowledge of what you just said is we can kind of go as professionals and feel like, yeah, sure, we can do this, and who knows what happens. But learning that, and I think that social capital, that comfort to say, oh, I can do this, and this is part of the norm. If you have no idea if it's part of the norm, then you're not going to self-nominate. So I think there's that other barrier of realizing if you don't know the norm of is this really okay, or is this sort of not okay? And there's plenty of implicit unwritten rules in communities that people encounter to realize that that's not a far-fetched question of like, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. Like, so yeah, I don't know. It might not just be shyness, it might be lack of familiarity with the sort of social norms. I don't know, that's what I'm wondering. Again, kind of that unpacking the layers of that awareness. But who knows?
Yeah, great points. I know some of these conversations have reminded me of talking to students about like how to ask for letters of recommendation and things like that. It's one of those unwritten practices, that there are no written rules for. And you're only kind of exposed to it. Like even in writing letters of recommendation for students, I got to like do that with my PhD advisor. And so it kind of taught me how to do it, or I've followed his model, plus reading about it from other places like GOREU or things like that. But, you're not like born knowing how to do these things.
I think that's where the that like interviewing resources kind of came to mind for me, because a lot of those questions for those of us who have been on search committees are like, yeah, of course those are the questions we're going to ask, but on the student or application end, like those are not obvious things. And I have been asked those exact questions on interviews from interview committees who are like, oh, that's a great list of questions, we'll grab it, which is really funny to encounter. But I wonder if, from the committee's point of view, I wonder if it would be worth kind of polling the different awards committees to say, could we ask you to ask your awardees and nominators for a couple of tips on self-nominating or tips on nominating, comments on impact, and kind of putting together the same kind of website of like, regardless of the award, like know that these make a really big difference. Just being nominated, it can be really meaningful to a person, but also just starting to collect some of those like pro tip if you're self-nominating, don't be humble. That's not a standard of our community, or like we want to hear you brag. We know you're awesome. Or if you're nominating someone else, sit down with the nominee to make sure they want to be nominated. And to ask them from whom letters should come, because there may be reasons that certain people would be asked that a nominator might not know. So yeah, I just wonder if that's one of the pieces of feedback there.
Or not asked.
Or not asked. Yeah, 100%.
Or not asked.
These are great ideas. I'm trying to note them down, and then Ashley says she will save the chat for us too. Maybe in Amy's absence, Sammy, would you like to close us out?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Yeah, thank you all for coming. This has really been a very good discussion, very good use of my 1 hour and 8 minutes, and I believe you've also really enjoyed the conversations, and thank you for all the ideas you shared with us. I believe going forward we will make our awards nominations and more broader, and then broaden our awardees as well. So thank you all for coming, and thank you for sharing your ideas. The DEI committee is always there to support you. So if you have any question, if you have anything, just reach out to us, and we are very much happy to talk to you. And yeah, I am 100% for self-nomination. So
Nice.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks all. I was going to sign off, but since we're done.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.